We had over 96 million in legals across 2 deals. Fees between them was north of 1 million. One was a 36 million pound one that we got circumvented on. The other one fell through. It's a level of exposure that you just can't have in business. So I started trying to get a little bit more creative with, okay, how can I actually make some serious cash without any money? You throw yourself in the deep end. You've got no option but to learn how to swim. Going back to the rent-to-rent business, I remember the first night that we had that property, we didn't have a booking on it. So I actually started going around town, giving out business cards. Like, it was idiotic. Yeah. But like, at that time, you think, this is just what I need to do to drive things forward.
Mark your calendars. The 2025 Property Developer Show is coming to 5 major cities across the UK, bringing the best service providers and developers together under one roof. On the 5th of March, we kick off in the first show at Milton Keynes, followed by Bristol on the 30th of April, Birmingham on the 16th of July, and then we're heading north to Manchester on the 10th of September, followed by our final stop in Newcastle upon Tyne on the 15th of October. Don't miss out on connecting with other developers, service providers, and industry leaders. Visit propertydevelopershow.co.uk to book your free ticket today. Welcome to another episode of the Property Developer Show, the podcast. Today, I'm joined by Aidan Nesbitt, a good friend of mine, particularly over the last few years. We certainly grew a bit closer in terms of business, being similar ages. Aidan is a pretty much investment consultant, helping international clients invest in the Northwest, mostly being Liverpool and Manchester, helping with retail investors as well as also big institutions as well. Aidan, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you.
So I guess for the people that don't know who Aidan Nesbitt is, give us a good insight in terms of where your property career started, how you kind of came about in terms of where you are today and how your career sort of evolved over the last few years.
Yeah, so my background is originally finance. So I worked for a mainstream lender, Barclays. Started off on an apprenticeship and just worked my way up. But from early stages, I transitioned over to mortgages. So I got exposed to mortgage finance and property from pretty much the start of my working career. So it was always something that I wanted to get involved in some capacity. Now, I saved up a first sum. I was doing a lot of overtime and decided to put that into a more passive project, what I thought was more suitable for me given the hours I was doing. So put that money into a new build, got sold all the main selling points, furniture packs, guaranteed rents, incentives, free legals, everything that seems like a big tick in the box at the start, but when you delve deeper, maybe they're provided to you with maybe misleading intentions.
And that was an investment as a buy-to-let rather than...
Yeah, so there was the option to let that on serviced accommodation as well, but that was my first investment. Now, I quickly realised that was never going to get me out of a job. And so I started trying to get a little bit more creative with, okay, how can I actually make some serious cash without any money? And maybe in the mental mind frame of an early stage investor, you being an employee, you don't really think about leverage as the way you would now. So the way I thought was the way I went to a property event. I had all these great strategies. Rent was one that stood out to me initially. Now, I approached 2 friends and said, would you like to go into business together? I came up with a strategy, and this is what I'd like to pursue. They were on board. We all put a couple of K into the business. Very minimal upfront cost, and we took on our first rent. After a few months working in business with friends, I realised that maybe work ethics and values weren't aligned. So I had the conversation to say, I'd like to take over, or however that looks. And so they slowly stepped back from the business. And coincidentally at the time, I'd also met a person who was also my business partner today, Antonio. He also had a rent-to-rent business with 2 of his other friends that, again, very similar journey up to that point where his kind of ambitions were different to theirs. And so we've seen a lot of synergy. We started collaborating with other things. We decided to invest in one ourselves within the business until eventually that evolved where he came on board as my business partner in the business. And we decided to scale that out. So we started raising investor finance, took that up to 10 properties across the UK. Now, we'd never been exposed to different economic conditions with a business. So there was quickly complications when, say, for example, COVID happens, you got energy bills rising. So that cut margins really tight, and it involved registration quite early on as well. Our turnover went up quite significantly with taking on 10. So quickly the margins were cut to a point where it wasn't really a viable business model that we could see pursuing unless we were actually taking on the management ourselves. Now, that wasn't something that we ever had any desire to do. So we decided to kind of level that out where it was. And he had another business that was doing really well at the time. And he was dealing with essentially high ticket sourcing. So he was primarily speaking with institutions based over in London, high net worths, and structuring a couple of deals where they were very lucrative. And because there was a lot of synergy, there was complementary skill sets, if you want to say. Anyone who knows Antonio knows he's a lot more outgoing than myself, a lot more of a star. And I would consider...
Even though I've got you on the podcast first.
yeah, because he's jet setting at the minute.
Yeah, can't be bad.
yeah, for sure. I'm a lot more mechanical in the way I do things. So we collaborate well. And yeah, he said, join me in this business and we'll drive things forward. So that was kind of how our business journey started. And yeah, fast forward a couple of years, obviously we've been working on the business, really pushing for the scalability of it. And we've evolved that in a number of ways based on market conditions. But yeah.
Do you know what? I speak to a lot of people in property, and I suppose for context of that, obviously you were still doing the mortgage brokerage, working where you were working, and you sort of reached out to me via a mutual friend.
Humble beginnings.
Yeah. And I think the second that I met you, like I knew we'd get on, and B, I knew like you weren't going to be messing around with little stuff. It was the big stuff, and I think it's credit to you in such a short period of time. You've like evolved massively in terms of like, where you were to obviously sort of where you are now. So my question is, what do you think formulates that kind of attitude towards business? Do you think it's natural? Do you think it's like a born desire? Like what do you think sort of formulates that?
It's a really interesting question, and it was one I was actually going to ask you. I honestly don't know. I mean, even from a young age, I remember my nan actually used to call me Mr. Drysdale. I think it was a banker off an old TV show. And any opportunity, like the reference, you're going to be a banker, you're going to be a banker. I didn't know to like what extent he meant by that, but I actually don't know how to answer this question. Yeah.
Fair. I think, in my opinion, I think it's difficult to say, isn't it? Because I think some people, will argue, well, anyone can be in business.
Yeah.
Anyone that follows Simon Squibb, I think his name is, who Have You Got a Dream?
Yeah.
That guy. He says anyone can be in business. And to a certain degree, I disagree with that, because I think it takes a certain type of skill set, person, environment to sort of develop a natural entrepreneur or someone that wants to be a high achiever. Because, fundamentally, anyone can be an entrepreneur, but I think you've got to have a certain skill set, mindset, ability in some format, that whether that comes from childhood upbringing, whether it comes from something drastic happening in your life that sort of makes you take that direction. But in my opinion, like and you probably understand it as well, and most people that are probably listening to this podcast, is you live and breathe business. And I think you posted on LinkedIn, how do you switch off? And my comment to that was, well, when I switch off, I'm thinking about how I can grow my business. And that is true. Like that it's just a full-time thing. And
it's a commitment.
I think you have to be a certain way to enjoy that, for sure. And whether that's being called a banker at 6 years old, or whether that's just a natural thing that maybe you're exposed to, or you're born with, I don't know. I couldn't tell you either, to be honest with you.
I mean, it's like you've touched on it there. I mean, drive is definitely a huge part of it. You've got to be all in. But if it's half-assed, I think that it's short-sighted. It's not going to be long-lived.
I agree. I mean, I've always been like, from a child, my mum always used to say, like, I never walked, like I never crawled. I just went straight to walking.
Yeah.
Rather than like being a normal kid, and like it was literally like, instead of like using the potty, it was like straight to the toilet. Like I've always been like, how can I do the most extreme thing in the deep end? And I think that's why I'm probably where I'm at in business, is because I was capable of taking those risks, or had that natural aptitude to actually go out there and just, like with the shows, doing going from 3 locations to 5 locations, 3 new locations that I've never been to in my entire life, apart from Milton Keynes. And I'm just like, fuck it, chuck me in the deep end and let's see if I can swim. And I think you've got to have probably some level of delusion, naivety, or, you know, just that kind of thing. And obviously with you in the investment side of stuff, to go, right, forget the full-time job, I'm just going to go full-time in this investment consultancy. Like, what was that transition like for you in your head? Were you kind of like, okay, I've saved this money, or was it like, this needs to work like from day dot?
Yeah, so obviously we had the first business that was more of a recurring revenue business. So it gave us a little bit of a blanket to say, okay, let's take the jump. There was still an element of uncertainty with it. And I think you've got to have some balls just to say, let's do it. But I think, like you said, if you throw yourself in the deep end, you've got no option but to learn how to swim. So I feel like over the last 2 years, the exposure that I've had to certain things you wouldn't have had if you stayed in the job. You're just delaying the progress of your journey, if that's your intention to go down that route anyway. And it all comes down to individual circumstances, but I feel like you're just prolonging the process. And then you go into a position where you can dictate your own diary. So you can go to the gym whenever you want, you can do this, you can do that. But it's then having the discipline to say, okay, these are the hours that I'm actually going to work, because you've got that fire under your feet. You've got to make it work. So you can quickly compromise on other things that are important to your life. So you've got to make sure that you manage that as best you can. I think it is a transitional period. There's a small period where you need to trial and test a few things before you get used to actually working for yourself. But once you get comfortable with it, then you start to evolve how that looks. I think that was probably the biggest transition. And yeah, so I think attention was another thing that I really struggled with, because like you said, you are working for yourself, the fire's under your feet, so you start compromising on things that probably you shouldn't. Even though you've got more time, suddenly you've got less time. So that was something that I had to really work on over the last maybe 12 months, just to kind of realign that. Not necessarily to a balance, but more in line with not just what I want out of business, but out of life as well.
Yeah. So in terms of that balance then, so like for me, I think my kind of understanding of that is, go in the gym so for me, my perfect like balance of my day is like, I'm in the gym for 8 o'clock, back home for about 9 o'clock, have a bit of breakfast, probably start work about 10, maybe 1, 2 o'clock-ish, I start to dip a little bit in terms of like my concentration, my focus, and then I'll probably have lunch, probably have, a coffee or an energy drink, something to just pick me up a little bit. Then I'll probably work through to like 5 o'clock, 6 o'clock, then I'll have dinner. And then depending on how much work I've got to do, I'll either maybe chill out, play some games, watch some Netflix, or I'll carry on working depending on what I've got to do. I'm assuming that's the kind of balance that you're sort of referring to.
I mean, my balance looks very different. So like, even when me and Christy go for a walk of an evening, like my brain is still on. So if there's an idea that comes up, I'm like, hold, like, I'm just going to write this in my notes. So like, I think for me, balance is making sure I'm getting my exercise in. Not necessarily playing on games, I'm not too asked about watching telly or whatever that looks like, but just being able to say, okay, I'm going to change my environment for a little bit, whatever that looks like. I think just having that shift. I would argue that maybe I don't switch my phone off as much and just say for a few hours I'm not going to do anything other than whatever I'm paying attention to at the time that's outside the business. I'm still working on that, but I think it's a long-term kind of journey that you can go through to refine it for sure.
I think it's like a ever-evolving thing.
Exactly.
I think when you kind of, you're not, I wouldn't say you're early stage, because your momentum's like, it's obviously it's good. You've got a tangible business, you've got staff, you've got turnover, you're doing well. But I think as you sort of get further on in business, and you obviously been doing it for 2 years now, full time, obviously not part time, well, not even part time, but in line with your full time job. I think over time you figure that the balance is just as important, because I've had times where I've completely burnt out, and then my productivity levels for 2 weeks rather than a couple of days is just completely squashed. And I think when you find that, well, I say in the early stages, the momentum you've got, the eagerness, the drive, it's rife, because you're in it, you're in the trenches, and it's like new and everything's dead exciting. And then you kind of get to that stage where everything becomes kind of monotonous, and you're just doing the same thing but really well, and you're trying to improve what that is, and you kind of get that to a different point, and then the levels kind of like evolve. And I think particularly if you're in that early stage of business, transitioning from full-time to full-time employment to full-time business, I think that level of commitment and structure you need that, and you need to be, I wouldn't say you need to be, but it certainly helps, like trying to wake up at 6, go to the gym, eat healthy, do all this stuff, because it ingrains that discipline.
For sure.
And when it comes to doing the work and driving revenue, making money, operating the business, you've kind of already done all the hard work. You've kept your discipline, you've kept your diet. So actually doing the work is like piss easy, because you've just woke up at fucking the crack of dawn.
You've done to win.
And that momentum, I think, is super important. And I've had days in the past where I'm like, I'm completely burnt. I don't want to get out of bed. This isn't working. The process is fucked. I don't know what I'm doing here. And you kind of doubt everything. But then that momentum starts again. And you kind of go through that phase. And I think the more you go on through business, I think it's finding that balance. And also understanding that, like for me, I try not to work. I've been working on weekends recently because I'm trying to get a refurb done, but I try not to work on weekends, because it's like, it's me time, and it gives me a bit of time to have that creative space. And
that's when all the good ideas come, for sure.
Yeah.
I think looking back, maybe at earlier stages when I'd left my job, or even prior when I was working up to that stage, my routine was very regimented. It was very rigid. It was almost, I would call it excessive looking back at it now. But I think, like you said, you have to go through that phase. And like some of the extremes I was doing, like going back to the rent-to-rent business, I remember the first night that we had that property, we didn't have a booking on it. So I actually started going around town, giving out business cards. Like, it was idiotic. Like, and it's such low form of leverage. But like at that time, you think, this is just what I need to do to drive things forward. As you're exposed to, clever ways of doing things, to leverage a little bit better, you'll become a little bit more strategic. And I think that maybe that balance just came through being able to leverage in a bit of a better way. You can delegate certain things, not to the extreme where you get lazy, but at the same time, you don't necessarily have to have that excessive, obsessive routine that you did previously.
I think high achievers and people that work hard, that I think there's always that element of, am I being lazy here? There's that quote, there's a guy that's like a reel, and he says, basically, lazy people do a little work. I can't remember exactly what it is. Calvin, can we pull it up?
Lazy people do a little work and think they should be winning, but winners work as hard as possible and still worry if they're being lazy.
That for me, when I first watched that, I was like, holy shit. Like, it was a bit like, I wouldn't call it like it was like an epiphany for me, because I'm always like hard on myself. I've always been hard on myself to say I'm not working hard enough, or I need to do more, or
I can relate, for sure.
And I think when you've got that kind of mindset to, when you're particularly not where you want to be and you're trying to further yourself, I think having that push and like if I spoke to someone else the way I speak to myself, I'd have no friends. Like,
you're giving yourself a tough time.
all the time, constantly. And I think as you get on in business, like that to me, that's the balance. The balance is being able to shut that off and not feel guilty for not working, and not feel guilty that you're not thinking about your business, or you're not answering calls, or you're not being proactive in some format. And I think that comes over time as the business develops, as you start to edge towards getting to achieving your goals and hitting targets and that sort of stuff. But then you've got to find the balance with that you don't end up like Tyson Fury, where you get to the top and you're like, now what?
It's the extreme of the other way.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So it's almost like enjoying the process, but then not like being too hard on yourself. And I think that's the difficult part from going full-time work, where someone puts something in front of you and says, dig that hole there, to then move into like full-time in business, where you're like, I've got to figure out where the hole is. And if the hole doesn't get dug by me, no one's going to dig it. So I need to dig 24/7 to make sure I'm in front of everyone. Yeah. It's a tough world, isn't it? This business stuff. So in terms of then, I suppose the business evolving, obviously you're working with international clients, you're working with retail investors in a sense of, well, we have to use that term loosely because it's actually a regulated term, retail investor, but you're sophisticated investors that are investing as a side piece to their full-time business, career, whatever it might be. Where do you sort of envision the business kind of going in terms of the next 5 years? You know, you're currently working with certain institutional investors. Are you looking to more invest in your own stuff? Are you looking to grow, continue to grow, or just sort of maintain what you've got if it's a nice balance, and just sort of do the not the easy stuff, but do the stuff that you're doing really well? Like, what does that sort of look like?
Well, I can touch on like what segments there are to the business, and where we can kind of see acquisitions growing, and where we see the scalability within the business itself. But there's two segments. So one is a lot more geared to institutions, high net worths, seasoned investors, typically looking for more value add stock, and it's typically juicier in terms of the size, a little bit shinier, if you want to call it that, and a little bit more exciting to work with as well, but a lot more moving parts to it, a lot more lumpy. And in terms of a scalable business model, they're very rewarding when you come through, but you have to take a 12-month view on that, because you're not going to be closing them left, right and centre. So as a business, you need to make sure that not only are you getting these nice lump sums, but you've got some recurring revenue that's coming into the business consistently, essentially. So the way that we've seen that evolve was by introducing a single arm unit to the business. Now, that was, if you want to call, more retail level stock for sophisticated investors who are just looking for either a certain yield or they're just looking to put the money to use. We essentially cater for people that are based over, say, in London, overseas, and just make sure that they're putting the money in the right fundamental locations, in the right places, to make sure that they can, safely say, okay, I'm putting my money to use. So
it's almost finding a balance between the two. So they've obviously got a full-time career and that obviously investing in property at the same time. So in terms of like, just jumping back to where you say from a scalability perspective, obviously certain businesses, in a sense of the scalability side, when you are talking about scalability and recurring revenue, where did you sort of identify that sort of, I guess, pipeline issue? Because I suppose that is a pipeline issue with what you're doing.
For sure. So say, for example, last year, we had over 96 million in legals across 2 deals. So we massively over-leveraged with these individual deals. One was a £36 million one that we got circumvented on. The other one fell through. So across them 2 deals, we seen a substantial part of our pipeline absolutely obliterated. Fees between them it was north of 1 million. So say no more. It's a level of exposure that you just can't have in business. So we made the strategic decision to not only focus on bigger stock, but to ensure that we have a strong pipeline regardless of 1 or 2 deals falling through. And that, like I said, evolved as looking at single units. Interestingly enough, there's ways that you can monetize them to get very good financial outcomes, especially if you're negotiating the deals well, securing good discounts, then you can be compensated really well for those. That's kind of how we evolved the business, just to not only serve us on a a lumpy sum basis, but just to make sure that cash is flowing in regularly.
What's the sort of things that you're using then to kind of make the deals a bit more creative in the sense of what you've just referred to there?
Yeah, so say for example, we're working with someone who has a buyer on the back end, then we will negotiate heavy with the seller if we're offering them a good solution based on their circumstances, and we've managed to secure, say, a 20k discount, then there's nothing to say that we can't sell that at a 10k discount and make 10k on it.
Mm-hmm. Nice. In terms of how that sort of comes together then from a negotiation perspective,
yeah,
how do you sort of find, so I guess for more context for the listeners, you've basically negotiated, let's say it's a 100 grand property,
yeah,
you've negotiated that property for 80,000 with the vendor, you've then sold that to an investor for 90,000, obviously 10,000 discount for the investor that you've sold it to, and you're making that 10,000 margin.
Yeah.
How do you kind of approach that sort of negotiation with the vendor? Because obviously they'll know that the sale's going through at 90 and you're keeping 10. How do you sort of work around that piece?
So the main hurdle that we've had to come is exactly what you've addressed, and the way that we get around that is we agree with them. Are you happy with 80? Okay, so if we can get you 80 today, does that work? Okay, so if we can sell for 90, and normally at that point we've overcame that barrier because we've already got their verbal agreement that they're okay with that price. Now normally they're typically fine with this because the type of properties that we're selling tend to be tenanted, so there's very limited buyer pool for those. They're not going for a residential homeowner. They're not going for any other type of buyer except an investor who's going to pay not over the odds for it because it's got a tenant in there that's only paying X. That's not to say we can't use rental increases to really bring that up to what it should be, but in most circumstances tenanted properties are under rented, which warrants us getting the discount.
Makes sense. Yeah, I guess it's those kind of, it's not really problem property, but it's just like a unique situation, tenant in situ, or there might be some nuances. So I suppose the landlord understands that, you're not going to sell to everyone in the market. It's a very select few. Yeah. And if you've got access to international buyers that want day one cash flow and stuff anyway, then you've got that solution that enables you to make that margin. Yeah. And that's how a capitalistic market works,
That's it. Yeah.
You buy a bean at 1p and sell it at 2p. It's as simple as that. So.
I think as well, they're not going to find that type of buyer on Rightmove as easily as they'd hope. And you go through the process of listing a property on market and all the hassle that comes in between. If we can offer an offload that's going to actually buy the property off them the first time round, in an ideal world, then it's a dream to them.
Yeah. No, it makes sense. So in terms of like someone that's maybe looking to, I guess, put these types of deals together, what bits, and you can answer this, I suppose, in any format, but what bits of advice would you give to that individual?
I would say, first of all, find someone who's actually doing it. And I would maybe start by offering to provide properties to them, like get exposure to how they actually take care of that operation, take through A to Z, be inquisitive and be able to really absorb what they're doing and take it on for yourself. But you're not going to be able to successfully execute it without either guidance or someone hand-holding you. So I would say do it with someone, and that way you can overcome that barrier. And once you're used to it, then you can go off and do it yourself.
It's great advice. I mean, I'd say that all the time when I sort of sit down with people or they pick my brain or whatever you want to call it. And I always say, like, for me, obviously, I always caveat and say, this is what worked for me, might be different for you. But I always say, get a job or get experience within the sector, whether that be working for someone else, work experience, sitting down with experience, exposure, like you say. I think it's underrated, I think. And people, if you want to do it full time, you need to have that level of exposure to it. If you want to invest in property and you've got a full-time job and business, appreciate you can't do that, which is where you come and speak to the likes of yourself, where you say, this is what I want, go and find it, and you go and find it. But in most cases, if you're, our age or you're looking for a career change, you need to get down and dirty and get your nails dirty, you just get in there and find that experience, which you get through. I suppose for you, being a mortgage broker, you kind of see it, being a letting agent, estate agent, working for a sourcing company, investment company, working for a project manager, QS. There's so many different jobs you can get that fit within the ecosystem of property. And I think that is a great bit of advice.
Yeah, I think as well, when you're earlier stages, the only thing or the main thing that you could really offer of value is your time. And if someone is looking for a specific thing and you can deliver that for them, you're providing value to that person. So if you're then getting exposure to anything that they're doing in terms of their operations, etc., then it's something that you can do just to really excel the process.
So jumping back to sort of your answer to the question in terms of like the split between the business, and obviously we touched on like the creative, the retail side, as you call it, more on then the sort of bigger sides, the chunkier deals. What kind of thing? I've got a few questions around this piece actually, because more from a curiosity perspective. But in terms of, I guess, the people that you're working with that are purchasing these types of deals, are they kind of institutional, or are they more like bigger investors that are looking for bigger stuff? And then the second question is, how do you go about finding these types of deals? And also, how do you not start buying them yourself?
Okay. Yeah, it's very good questions as well. I think for the first one, it's a mix of institutions, high net worths, and very established developer clients. Now, there's nuances to working with all three of them. And initially, and when we were really pushing this last year, I would say that we were very focused on institutional clients. Now, there's definitely pros to working with them. There's a lot of negatives too. There's a lot of hoops to jump through when it comes to getting the deals agreed. There's not any scope to make mistakes. So there's a lot of pressure dealing with that type of clientele. Like, we went to a funds office in London, and we're sitting across the desk from someone who's raised north of 100 million. And the caliber of people that you're dealing with is another level. So these are people at the top of the game, and you don't see them, you don't know who they are, you don't see them on socials. Yeah, so while it's very rewarding working with these type of clients when you can get things over the line, there's a lot of demand pressure that kind of comes with that. In terms of high net worths, they seem to be, without stereotyping, they tend to be a little bit more straightforward to deal with. They've got, say, for example, a business that they've sold. They want to put X amount into property. That's typically your best type of client that you can deal with, because they'll be a little bit more flexible on things than, say, for example, an institution would be. Developer style clients, I really like working with, because they are no bullshit. Like, they've done it all themselves. The straight talkers, communicate well. You know, if they say they're going to do something, then they follow through with it. And they're experienced enough to know a deal when you see one, and they move on it. So yeah, they're great to deal with. And I would say that we're gravitating more towards working with them type of clients over the institutions now, just because the speed that we're actually able to get things to them is a lot quicker in comparison to the institutions.
How do you sort of find approaching those types of clients? Without giving away all your secrets, where do you come across these types of people? And B, how do you sort of put yourself on their kind of level to talk the jargon, to be credible? Like, what sort of things is it? Like, when you're approaching the meeting, you kind of dressing smart, or it's more the credibility piece in the background? It's how you approach it. Like, what does that kind of look like?
Yeah, so I think you've got to have a base layer of competence to deal with them. But I think the best way to get in with these type of guys, you put a deal that they want in front of them. Like, say, for example, if you send them a deal that looks attractive to them, that talks more than what you probably can to get them interested in you. Send them what they want, and then they'll look at it.
Yeah, it makes sense. So it's just pretty much putting money where your mouth is.
Yeah, obviously you've got to do a little bit of due diligence on them to know what they actually want. They might give you a little bit of a feedback loop from there, and then you can build on that. But I would say that's the best way to approach them. You won't find these guys on socials. It's either through an introduction or LinkedIn.
So that kind of loops quite nicely then to my first question. Where do you find these people?
Yeah, so you won't find them on more active social media like Instagram, TikTok, etc. Obviously, it's professional platforms like LinkedIn. Introductions tends to be a good way to actually get in with these guys, but you need to know someone who knows someone to get there.
Yeah. My mum always said it's not what you know, it's who you know. And it's
Very wise woman.
yeah. She was, to be fair, mate. Yeah. Or she is. She's still there.
Yeah.
But yeah, I appreciate you can't give away all the tricks of the trade. But I think it's an interesting market, that type of market. And I from the outside looking in, it feels like once you're kind of in, then I will recommend you to so and so, and then that's you're at that sort of level then. And that I suppose that's all that is any networking really. Once you kind of in with the kind of that type of person, then it's easier to network in those types of circles and stuff. And that I mean, you can't get from a business and financial wealth perspective. I don't think you can get much better circles, to be fair.
No, we're trying to leverage certain clients in the best way possible that we can see opportunities with, and maybe more creative ways than we would have last year. So say, for example, if someone's got an opportunity that needs funding, we've got access to certain private equity funds that we know will be interested in that type of stuff, then we're positioning it very differently to look at equity stakes, etc. And once you've got a base layer of a relationship with them, that proposal doesn't sound so preposterous once you've actually, like I said, got an existing relationship with them. But it's just knowing when to utilise certain contacts for certain things in order to maximise the opportunity, really.
How do you context with this question. So I know, obviously, you've been in business for a reasonably, well, we've both been in business for a short period of time in the comparison of the grand scheme of things. Yeah. But you were looking at big deals like pretty quickly, like, within the first 12 months, which I think even from my perspective, I was like, wow, fuck me, like that's impressive. Fair enough. How have you sort of managed to navigate that piece? Because I think a lot of people would probably look at what you've been looking at and trying to fund and maybe get overwhelmed or think that they're not capable of it. Like, how, from a mindset perspective, what have the challenges been in that process? And B, how have you sort of overcome any doubt or imposter syndrome or anything like that you might have had, which I imagine you have had?
Yeah, so I think the challenge that you mentally have to prepare for is that 99% of these will not go through. I don't think it's necessarily a mindset issue. Like, you've got to accept that is the reality, and yet still you've got to push forward and actually say, no, this will happen, even though that the likelihood is it won't. Is
that something that you've realised, or that you kind of knew from the off, or was it kind of like, I'm just going to go for this, let's see where I get, and then you've slowly realised that actually there's a small percentage chance that this is actually going to come off?
So I'll answer this in a different way. So the first week I left my job, I went to a viewing with a institution that they were looking to purchase a portfolio of 5.5 million. And we got an offer of 5. So within a week of leaving my job, I thought we were making about 120k based on our part of the fee that we were getting. That didn't happen, but that was how easy it could have been. So I think that was enough to make me say, okay, these big deals, you could do the same thing in theory and get the same outcome. Now, it's not always the case. And in most cases, there's a lot more moving parts to the bigger deals. But on the deals that you do close with the bigger stuff, you realise that took us just as much work as the little ones.
So it's almost like the business model for you guys. It's kind of like the down and dirty stuff. That's like the consistent pipeline. You know that's going to drop in. Then the big like deals, they're like, okay, we can go on holiday when this drops. The kind of operational costs are covered by the smaller deals. And then the dividends are these big deals.
Juicy ones.
Because then I guess from a business risk perspective, you're not like, okay, well, we've got £1 million worth of deals that are potentially going to drop in. But of those deals, there are only 2 or 3. And the likelihood of 2 or 3 deals dropping out are quite high. Versus £1 million worth of 150 property transactions. The likelihood of 150 property transactions falling out of bed is...
You're still leveraging your risk.
Yeah, because you are... Yeah, the risk, I suppose the leverage risk is the pipeline. And when you're trying to develop and build a pipeline, it's all about keeping the business afloat.
Yeah.
That's like number one priority. And how do you de-risk that? By having that variety, whether it be big institutional deals that are the big money that gives us dividends, nice pay, whatever, however you want to spend that money, invest in your own stuff, which I think you've alluded to off air, and then the down and dirty stuff. That's the consistent cash flow, pays the bills, keeps the roof over the head, etc., etc. So kind of on that piece then that I've just mentioned, looking at other deals then, because obviously you invest, you're sourcing for other institutionals, but then obviously looking to, I think you were looking at hotel and you're looking at other stuff. Like, how are you using the contacts that you've created in this on your existing business to invest in those types of things? How's all that sort of coming together?
Yeah, so 100%. A lot of it that we're exploring at the moment, whether it's on an acquisition basis, whether it's on a sourcing basis, hotel, that was all through existing contacts that we were trying to leverage in best way possible to maximise the opportunity, not only for ourselves, but for the people that we're bringing on board.
Makes sense. So I guess from the whole sort of investment piece, like in terms of your business model, you've kind of got the institutional side, which is obviously the big lump sums, bigger portfolios, you know, working with private equity, funds, you know, that sort of stuff, developers, high net worths. And you've got the kind of, down and dirty stuff, we'll call it, even though it's probably not, but it's, you know, like traditional buy-to-let stuff, smaller portfolios that people are buying. And then you've got your own acquisition arm that you're looking at businesses, hotels, you know, your own portfolios, be it social housing. So you've kind of got that, like, that whole ecosystem that feeds itself in a way, because you've almost got like the cherry pick of, oh, this deal looks nice, let's take it for ourselves, or actually that fits that criteria, or that fits that, and it's just having, so pretty much anything that comes into the sausage machine, if you want to call it that, you've kind of got somewhere that kind of, it might fit here or there. And I suppose that's a business model. That is the business model, isn't it? Even though it's like multiple business models.
Just maximising opportunities.
Yeah, definitely.
And I think that we've got a lot more wise of how to maximise certain opportunities, whereas maybe we're a little bit one-track minded with how to do things in the past. Sourcing isn't the only route. If you can leverage things in the right way, then you know you can explore it from a different angle. So that's something that we're looking at more and more recently, and I'm hoping to build on over the next 12 months. I would say that our focus is definitely property when it comes to any acquisitions at the moment, but that might mean property businesses that are giving us, you know, an outcome on an equity position.
Nice. Okay, makes sense. So if people want to reach out, if they might have a deal, big portfolio in the Northwest, or money, how can they go about doing that? Yeah,
socials, best way to go. Aidan Nesbitt, pretty much.
Cool.
Any platform, it's cool.
Happy days. Obviously put all the details and descriptions and stuff like that anyway, so people will be able to click and follow you. And hopefully we get some portfolios off the back of this episode. Good stuff. Appreciate you.
You get a little referral fee.
Say again.
You get a referral fee.
Yeah. All right, mate. Perfect. Right, you heard that. Get some deals in here now. Great stuff. No, I appreciate you coming on today.
Likewise. Thanks for having me on.
Pleasure. So thank you very much for tuning in today. Obviously, great to hear Aidan's story, and hopefully you've had some value in a sense of how a larger sourcing company can work. And obviously, of course, if you're looking to get started, or maybe you've got a couple of deals that you want to help source on, obviously reach out to Aidan and he will no doubt be able to help. Thanks very much for tuning in. Obviously, as I always say on every single episode, I know you probably hate me for it, if you listen on the audio version, leave a review. And if you're listening on YouTube, please do like and subscribe. It helps me get guests like this. Thanks very much. See you again soon. Take care.